Every city has its coat of paint. For most people, it's just a background, something they walk past on their way to somewhere else. But if you stop moving for a second and look closer, you realize the walls are actually talking to you. They are a living archive of who we are, stamped right on the brickwork of our daily lives. To understand the soul of this architecture, you have to throw out the modern assumption that street art began with an aerosol can. The word graffiti itself tells you the real story. It is rooted in the Italian word graffio, meaning a scratch, which traces back to the ancient Greek graphein, the literal act of writing or drawing. When archaeologists uncovered Pompeii, they didn't find a pristine, sanitized museum. They found a city whose walls functioned exactly like a modern social media feed or a community bulletin board. Everyday citizens used iron tools to scratch declarations of love, insults, political campaigns, and neighborhood gossip directly into the exterior bones of their shelters. Human beings have always possessed an innate, urgent impulse to leave a mark on their environment. It didn't start as vandalism, it started as the ultimate proof of human existence. Now let's look at the actual physics of what was happening on those ancient walls from a trade perspective. To understand the mechanics of an ancient scratch, you have to understand the substrate. Roman buildings weren't raw brick on the exterior. They were coated in a thick, multi-layered mortar mix made of slacked lime, volcanic ash, and pulverized marble dust. This stucco was applied in up to 3 separate coats, packed down tightly with heavy trowels to form a dense protective skin over the porous stone beneath it. Over decades of intense Mediterranean heat, that lime coating underwent a chemical process called carbonation. It absorbed carbon dioxide from the air and literally turned back into a hard, brittle crust of calcium carbonate. When an ancient writer lined up an iron nail or a bronze stylus to scratch a tag, they weren't gliding a pen over paper. They had to exert deliberate mechanical force to puncture that carbonated crust. Every stroke was a mini fracture, shearing the brittle top layer away from the base coat and leaving behind a jagged, chalky white trench that caught the shadow of the sun. When hundreds of different writers targeted the exact same eye-level pillars and public corridors over 50 years, they were literally degrading the surface tension of the exterior finish. They were grinding down the face of the architecture, one scratch at a time. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, the human impulse shifted from scratching surfaces to coating them with pressurized pigment. The birth of modern aerosol graffiti in cities like Philadelphia and New York wasn't a public decoration project. It was the birth of an inward-facing, hyper-competitive secret society. To an outsider, a complex, wild-style piece looks like a chaotic explosion of abstract shapes. But not to an old-school graffiti writer. It is a highly disciplined demonstration of typography, flow, finger pressure, and muscle memory. In an urban landscape where marginalized youth felt completely invisible, putting your name on a transit car that rode through every borough was a radical act of staging your own existence. To an everyday commuter walking past a wall, a complex graffiti piece looks like an unreadable, chaotic scramble of lines. But if you look at it through the lens of trade application, you realize you're looking at a highly disciplined mechanical mastery of fluid dynamics. A traditional graffiti writer doesn't just push a button. They manipulate pressure, distance, and speed. Unlike commercial painting, where you strive for a perfectly uniform, atomized coat with 0 runs, a graffiti writer builds an entire typographic style around the behavior of a pressurized can. They swap out factory nozzles for specialized aftermarket caps, using skinny caps to restrict the vapor output for razor-sharp, fine structural outlines, or fat caps to open the valve wide, dumping a high volume of pigment onto the surface for rapid, solid color fills. They regulate their finger pressure to prevent sagging and rely on pure, rapid muscle memory to execute flowing curves before the paint can pool and drip. It's a precision trade application executed under extreme time constraints. As the subculture exploded, the state pushed back. By the late 1970s and 1980s, graffiti was hit with a massive social stigma, codified by the broken windows theory of criminology. To city officials and property owners, paint on a wall wasn't expression, it was a visual symptom of societal decay, a signal that a neighborhood was losing control. Millions of taxpayer dollars were poured into chemical buffers, transit security, and razor wire fences to scrub the public view clean. But as any trade professional knows, a coating is only as strong as its bond to the substrate. The oppression didn't stop the subculture, it forced it to adapt. Writers became faster, their techniques sharper, and they pushed deeper into the veins of the city, reclaiming the back alleys, rail corridors, and industrial dead zones where the mainstream refused to look. From a trade coating perspective, this era birthed a completely unorganized, ongoing war of chemistry and adhesion. The city's primary weapon became the buff, the rapid, thoughtless application of cheap, flat latex primer or exterior house paint to block out unauthorized markings. But as any industrial painter knows, a coating is only as permanent as its mechanical bond to the substrate. Traditional spray paint utilizes a tight liquid carrier that drives deep into the microscopic pores of unsealed masonry and raw brick. When a city buffer rolls a cheap water-based latex coat directly over a glossy, oil-rich aerosol line without any surface preparation, etching, or proper deglossing, the cross-linking of the paint fails. The top layer cannot form a proper mechanical bond. Over a few harsh Canadian winters, moisture gets trapped between the layers, causing the gray buff coat to blister, crack, and delaminate, exposing the original aerosol signature underneath. The subculture literally refuses to be chemically erased. While traditional graffiti writers fiercely defended the freehand flow of the aerosol can, a different kind of architectural intervention emerged. The tactical stencil. Characters like Banksy revolutionized the landscape by using speed as a primary design constraint. By pre-cutting complex images into templates at home, a stencil artist could walk up to a wall, apply a single, rapid blast of pigment, and walk away in 30 seconds with a pristine, high-detail message. This category didn't care about the subcultural letter forms. They used dark, satirical working-class humor to hold a mirror up to corporate greed and state authority. The true irony of this movement is what happened next. the Banksy effect. The exact same institutions that once criminalized the paint began spending millions to buy it. Landlords who used to call buffer squads were suddenly installing bulletproof glass over their exterior walls to protect a $1 million piece of street real estate overnight. From a mechanical perspective, the stencil is a masterpiece of masking technology. In commercial spray operations, masking is used to protect a surface from overspray. In stencil art, the mask is the form. The technical challenge here is managing air pressure and tool distance against a highly irregular architectural substrate. If the artist holds the spray can too close or uses a high-volume fat cap, the sheer velocity of the propellant creates a massive air vortex beneath the stencil, forcing the wet pigment to bleed out into ugly, fuzzy halos called underspray. To achieve a crisp, razor-sharp edge that looks like a factory print on a rough masonry wall, the artist must utilize a low-pressure can, hold the nozzle at a strict 90-degree angle, precisely 8 inches away, and apply rapid, misting passes. It is an industrial printing technique, executed clandestinely on an uncooperative vertical canvas. While the underground subculture and the stencil satirists operated in the shadows, a parallel evolution took over the main streets. Sanctioned professional mural art. As a commercial painter, you see these walls for what they truly are: monumental, structural trade labor. This isn't rapid vandalism. This is meticulous execution. It requires hours of surface preparation, complex scaling formulas, scissor lifts, and roller extensions. Cities finally realized that empty gray concrete infrastructure actively drains a community's energy. Instead of fighting a losing battle against tags, municipalities and business owners began handing the keys over to professional muralists. These pieces don't speak inward to a subculture, they speak outward to the public, acting as visual historians that anchor local pride directly onto the physical infrastructure of the neighborhood. As a commercial trade professional, you don't look at these monuments and see simple street art. You see massive, highly organized, grueling structural labor. This isn't a rapid, stealthy midnight intervention. This is a meticulous industrial tier coating project that requires weeks of heavy logistics and site preparation. Before a single drop of artist pigment touches the brick, the substrate must be aggressively prepped. It requires power washing away decades of atmospheric soot, repairing failing mortar joints, and rolling out heavy coats of high-adhesion masonry primer to seal the porous brick and establish a uniform pH level. To scale an image across a 40-foot vertical wall without distortion, artists must use complex math, grid projection systems, or doodle grid techniques. They operate heavy industrial equipment, scissor lifts, boom trucks, and articulated platforms, while battling high wind resistance, shifting sunlight, and rapid paint drying times. It is a rigorous, demanding construction trade masquerading as fine art. And then, all of these parallel histories collide into a single, monumental point. Right in the heart of downtown Hamilton stands a massive, two-story concrete monstrosity caught entirely in limbo. Shut down, boarded up, and paused indefinitely between its past life and a corporate condo future that hasn't arrived yet. A lesser community would let dead space like this sit as a decaying, boarded-up corporate eyesore. But this city doesn't wait around. A collective of local street artists went directly to the developers, loaded onto lifts, and coated the entire two-story block in a uniform blanket of black, turning an industrial pause into the largest collective canvas in the country. On these walls, the dividing lines evaporate. The raw, baseline graffiti of the streets lives in perfect symbiosis with the soaring professional masterworks above it. From a pure painting and surface coating perspective, what happened on this block is absolute madness. To transform an entire multi-story city mall into a unified canvas, volunteers and trade artists literally executed a total visual blackout. They loaded onto scissor lifts and used high-output airless sprayers to coat thousands of square meters of highly uncooperative, non-porous exterior materials, including anodized aluminum, window mullions, and slick, tempered storefront glass, in a uniform layer of flat black primer. By creating a total visual void, they engineered the ultimate high-contrast playground for paint. The flat black primer acts as a giant sheet of negative space, forming whatever pigment lands on top of it to pop with an intense neon brilliance that daylight usually dilutes. Because this massive project was entirely self-funded through local sponsorships, it balances on a thin wire of trade compromise, featuring everything from high-tier, professionally gridded portrait murals on the upper fascia, funded by corporate patrons, down to raw, unauthorized aerosol tags at the street-level baseline. It is a complete structural cross-section of the entire medium, applied to a single building. Even when the gears of development grind to a halt, the heartbeat of the city keeps moving. From the scratched stucco of Pompeii to the flat black primers of today, the story remains the same. No matter how gritty the terrain gets, the human element will always find a way to make it beautiful.